you're the only person I can ask this question to. I mean, you are the president of the Institute at its 150th birthday. I mean, what kind of a milestone is that for you, and how does it underscore the importance of your job right now?
Well, it's providing an opportunity for us to look back as well as look forward. And the reason I came to MIT, an outsider, was because of the extraordinary contributions MIT has made to the nation and the world. And it was a real call of service. And this is just a moment when you can look back on what MIT has done and really understand in a deep way its extraordinary role in framing up the 20th century and the 21st century. And so it's a really important moment for the Institute. It's a privilege to be president at the moment that we're celebrating the 150th. And I think it's a critical moment for our nation. And I'm hoping we're going to position the 150th around the opportunities that we have going forward that, frankly, we might be missing. We're at a different time in the nation from where we were 50 years ago. And I think that the opportunity to kind of, think back at what we have accomplished over the last 50 years, because we marked our 100th anniversary, is really the story of the 20th century in the world, but really the story of America leading the world in the second half of the 20th century. And the lessons we can learn from that as far as going forward are going to be important, not just for MIT, but for the nation.
How do you, as an administrator, as a leader at this institution, balance the need to understand the importance of your job and the humility required to honor the legacy of an institution 150 years old? Balance those two to lead in a way to get something accomplished?
It's a great question, and you can't walk in the doors of the place. You can't look at the building without being consumed by humility. It is an astonishing place, and it's filled with astonishing people. Its reach is astonishingly broad and important, and so it's. I think it's a prerequisite. Humility is a prerequisite for the job, and frankly, a prerequisite for being here. One of the things that struck me when I first, joined MIT was the surprising humility, considering who I was talking to and what MIT has done. So there's a real sense of. It's not false humility. I think it's a real sense of the magnitude of the challenges, the magnitude of the problems that we address, and how difficult it is to make any progress against them. And so I think that's where the humility comes from. And also, just about anyone who walks down the halls of this place and talks to students or faculty or staff realizes how accomplished people are. And so it's hard to feel that you yourself are accomplished when you're surrounded by people who are just quite remarkable. Now, how we get things done is a really important question, and it's something that everyone wonders, is how do you get anything done in a place where the premise is about individual achievement? And we're an entrepreneurial culture. Universities are by their nature entrepreneurial. It's about how you advance the frontiers of knowledge, how you advance your own frontiers of learning or knowing. And so it's a very individual sport in a sense. But what I always remind people when they ask me what it's like to be around, the greats at MIT, and assuming that that's an unpleasant or a difficult task, is if anyone on this campus imagined that they could accomplish what they want to accomplish on their own, they'd be working in their garage. So people come here because they see the power in being part of this truly extraordinary community. And my role is to harness those ambitions and recognize the synergies and create the opportunities for people that are greater than they might be able to create on their own. So for me, my job is facilitating what the community wants to do. And that's where the initiatives of my presidency have come from. They're all from the community. People imagine I brought the Energy Initiative to MIT. Nothing could be further from the truth. I came to MIT and discovered an incredible passion and interest in really making a difference in solving the world's energy challenge, and tremendous capability to do that. And my job was to provide a structure through which people could exercise their ambitions and their dreams. And so I think that's the challenge of running any kind of organization that's based on individual enthusiasm, individual achievement, individual ambition.
We're going to return to talk about the Energy Initiative, but it occurs to me to ask now, just because of what you just said, what's it like in that moment where you as the president says, we can do this, we are going to do this, and then to watch it all begin to play out?
Well, it's utterly amazing, because one of the things that I have insufficient imagination to do is to really understand what can be accomplished here. You know, I have a rough idea, but in every case, what gets done here, what people are able to think here, what people are able to dream here, is invariably far beyond where my mind could get. And again, you know, if I thought I could do this better on my own, I'd be doing it someplace else. It is very much a community activity. I describe the experience of being here and talking to, you know, any faculty member, any student, you know, any conversation, and discovering myself in a future I had not yet imagined. And that's the experience of saying, well, you know, you all say we'd like to do this, and if we did it this way, we could do more. And having people say, well, sure we could, and then not just do more and more and more beyond what I certainly could have imagined when we launched.
The story of your development as a scientist from the early days in your childhood, really, in some sense, is the story of first seeing, and sometimes it's technology that enables that seeing, and then the going from, wow, I can see the landscape, now I have to ask the right questions to figure out what's going on here. Is in some sense that's what happened when you got your first microscope? You were able to see a world, and then as the fascination of just being able to see what you couldn't see before wore off, you begin to formulate the questions, which resulted in the real science that you have been so privileged to do during your career.
You know, it's hard, you know, for me to describe what the motivation is that gets you to the place that no one's been before. You know, and that's the thrill of, you know, being a scientist, is testing the boundaries. And it's a little bit like poking on this wall and saying, is there really a wall here? And all of a sudden your hand going through and getting to some place that you didn't know existed. And I think the process of that is using a microscope or using whatever technology is at hand, because science is very often the story of new technologies. You know that quite well. And it's really a discipline of your mind to take the things that you are seeing. Well, you know, perhaps there are things that other people have seen also, and being able to recognize something that is non-standard. So one of the hardest things, I think, as a scientist, is to see the glimmer of something new and not to dismiss it as just more of the same. And, you know, as I talk to scientists about how they do the work, that really is kind of, you know, part of the, as I said, the discipline of the mind. It's why, you know, scientists, the caricature of scientists is just a little off balance, right? Or scholars just a little off balance, because the ability to see things a little bit differently and push the technology a little bit further. You know, I often say that, you know, 5% of science is seeing the glimmer so that you know that there's something new there, and 95% is, you know, kind of, you know, stoking that glimmer till it gets to be bright enough for everyone to recognize that what you've seen is actually there. So, you know, 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration. The perspiration is, you know, working so, you know, the hard work to bring something that is just barely visible to you that you believe is there into visibility for others.
You grew up in a family of girls, right?
Yes.
3 sisters.
That's right.
And your father, an executive at General Electric.
He started at General Electric.
Right.
He was he had just come out of law school, and he was a patent attorney at General Electric, and moved through corporate America, and he was ended up being general counsel and vice president for How Met, but he started at GE.
An exciting time to both grow up as a child in America in terms of the development of science and technology and business, and an exciting time to be an executive, it seems to me. How did you experience that as a child growing up?
You know, it's interesting. You know, I think we had a classic, you know, kind of 1950s, 1960s family. You know, lots of activity in the home, lots of focus on the kids' education and music lessons and, you know, dance lessons and any kind of, you know, pursuing whatever our interests might be. And I went to junior high school and high school in Chappaqua. My father worked in Manhattan, and, you know, he was gone for most of the day and came back, and we focused on us. You know, all the focus was on the kids, quite surprisingly. And so we didn't know much about what he did. When I was in elementary school, I would go to his office from time to time, and I just sure couldn't figure out what he did. You know, he sat at a desk. I said, "You play with paper clips all?" Yeah, I love going to the office because there are all kinds of things to, you know, fiddle with. But I think that as my father was an electrical engineer before he went to the war and came back and went to law school, and so he had a real sense of, you know, the same deep desire to understand how things worked, and that certainly showed in, you know, how he understood things, the dinner conversations, what he did around the house, which was fixing things, building things, you know, making things work and understanding how they work to make them work better. And so I think that's part of what infused at least my understanding of the fun there was in the world.
For most people, I think there's a certain kind of bravery involved in having the wherewithal to take something apart and figure out how it works. That came to you naturally, it seems. Where did that come from, and what are some stories of you taking things apart?
Naturally, you know, we often assume that everyone thinks the same way we do, right? And how could they not? Because this is our perspective, our point of view of the world. And I don't know where it came from. I think probably, you know, the background was watching my father take things apart to fix them, and so.
Of course you could do it.
Of course you take things apart. Getting them back together was never necessarily part of the program. So I just would take almost anything apart. And as I said, I didn't know that it was unusual. I kind of assumed, I never looked to see whether other people were leaving this trail of bits and pieces of things they had taken apart behind them. Of course, most people don't do that. But I was at a friend's house and I was fiddling with the door opener, you know, this little device that prevents the door from slamming. And she said, "Don't do that." I said, "Why not?" She said, "Well, because you're always taking things apart and they never get back together." And I had never even recognized that this was an unusual feature of the way my mind worked. And the reason I was taking them apart because I wanted to understand how they worked. And isn't that what we all have to do? Well, we probably do all do that in some way, but not everyone does it physically. And I would say, so one other connection is my degree's in anatomy. And what anatomy allowed me to do was the same thing, was to take things apart and to derive an understanding of function from structure. And for students, and you know, I always advise you to figure out what transformation makes things make sense to you. So for some people it's anatomy, for some people it's physiology, for some people it's biochemistry or molecular biology. You know, there are transformations in the world that are quite intuitive, and for me, structure, you know, intuitively leads to function.
For you then, is there a kind of universality to an inquiry into function in the sense that anatomy is the same as engineering, is the same as physiology, is the same as chemistry?
I think so.
Really?
I think so.
That's a useful insight for a place like this, I would think.
I think so. And I think that one of the reasons that engineering doesn't feel alien to me, and this was quite a fear when I came in, was that I wouldn't, you know, kind of get it about engineering, is that there are a lot of commonalities, you know, between how I decode the world and how engineers decode the world. They really do focus on putting things together, though, where I focused on taking things apart.
The other sort of passionate story that comes out of your childhood is a fascination with how people come to be, how lives become the result of choices that people made. You describe a particular experience in the library where you discovered biographies of people, and it wasn't particular people that fascinated you so much, but that it could be set down as a story of, oh, that's how that person got to be that person. Describe a little bit what it was you discovered and how important that was.
Well, I think one of the things that was fascinating for me, I discovered this set of biographies when, I must have been in 3rd or 4th grade, most 5th grade. And it was the same sense of, we think of famous people as fully formed, but that you could understand, the pieces of their lives that led them to, the finished product that we view as something quite static. And, I guess you could say that it's the same kind of mental dissection that I would do of a watch or an iron or whatever object came my way, or the brain when I started to do brain anatomy. But I find some things absolutely fascinating. So Barbara McClintock, who I had the extraordinary privilege to know when I was at the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, viewed the world in a way that was different from anyone I'd ever spoken with. And again, in a way frankly, I never understood. So it was infinitely fascinating for me to talk to her, because no matter what topic we would open, she would describe that topic in a way I had never heard before. And in those descriptions, I would learn things about it that, of course, I had never learned before, because you've got to see the relationship between things to understand how it all fits together. I'm sorry, I have to understand the relationship between things to understand how they come together. So, the other piece of, the human interactions that I only late in my life discovered was interesting was, how organizations can work. And that's, of course, now the thing that probably fascinates me as much as anything.
Part of the lesson from those biographies, it seems to me, was you understanding that people got that way because of choices they made, not because of some preordained track that they were on. And that involved some pretty important mentoring for you, going from someone who seemed to be interested in biology versus someone who decided to become a scientist. Can you describe where that transition was important in your early education?
Yeah, and let me kind of rephrase it, because it's the choices are the second step. Making the choices, this is the second step, and it's seeing the choices are available, right? Seeing that there are choices to be made. And, again, when I think about my role here at MIT, it's about opening opportunities. It's not about setting out the choices, or making the choices for anybody. It's just increasing an awareness of the possible. And so great mentors for me have been the people who have, opened the window just a little wider so you can see possibilities that didn't exist before. And, it's important that people in your life who you care about and respect affirm that you can do something. But what I think is even more important are people who reveal a greater part of the world to you, so you know that there is another set of choices that you would never have imagined existed before. And I think those are the really great mentors, the people who just kind of open your mind to possibilities that you didn't know existed, and it gives you a kind of freedom that you didn't have.
Do you recall anything about that first microscope that you received in, I guess, elementary school?
Yeah, 5th grade.
Yeah?
Christmas.
First slide?
I remember just,
yeah,
just fantastic. So here's the thing about microscopes. You look at an object and you think you understand its structure. And you put it under a microscope, and every little piece of it has an extraordinary structure, within the structure that you can see. And you can go through, a light microscope, an electron microscope, all of the orders of physics. And it's a big question in physics. What is the basic building blocks of the physical universe? I mean, it's a great question, and how fantastic it is to, at every level of resolution, to see gorgeous structure, beautiful order, unfolding, you know, as deep as you can go, it just gets more and more fantastic. And so you don't really get to the end of it. It's a, you know, infinitely beautiful structure. And it, you know, of course, we know it goes out on the large scale also, but, you know, for me, I like the micro scale rather than the mega scale.
Although in each case, higher resolution becomes better questions, and higher resolutions, better questions, and, you know, it's a sort of never-ending process.
Right.
Do you remember the first slide you looked at?
Yeah, it was, you know, the microscope came with a set of slides. It was a slide of some plankton, magnificent colors, bizarre Dr. Seussian kind of structure, wonderful things. And I just remember taking it out of the microscope, once I looked at the microscope, and holding it up and trying to, in my mind, do the, you know, understand how the thing that I was looking at without magnification became the, you know, the next level of resolution structure. Very
It's
exciting.
the same thing.
Really exciting.
It's the same thing. Yeah. it
Yeah.
is.
I mean, intoxicating. I mean, for me, yeah, absolutely intoxicating.
Your undergraduate education was University of Rochester?
Yes. Yes.
Why did you decide to go there?
You know, why I decided to go there, it was there. You know, who knows? I mean, you know, it just ended up that I was there, but not so much from choice as just, you know, college counselor said apply to these schools. I applied to these schools. You know, I got into Rochester. I got into some other places. I don't even remember where else. And, you know, Rochester was the place I went. I was in college from 1969 to 1973. A very difficult time to be in college, as we understand in college to be, well, as it is to be in college at MIT today, or in college anywhere in America today. It was a time of enormous social upheaval, political unrest, and for people whose interests were in those things, you know, an interesting time, but from my perspective, a very distracting time, and a time that certainly brought many things good to the country, but a time of just profound, what I call dislocation. So a difficult time to focus on your studies, if your studies were not politics.
Did you find a frustration with the ways in which people were working out their political anxieties versus the sense of pragmatism and an inquiry into the nature of things that was sort of at the center of your heart?
I sure wish I understood things as well then as I do now. I think you've just articulated better than I ever have, you know, what the conflict was for me in college. You know, it ended up that my discovery of the thing that really made my heart sing happened, you know, after I left college, even though the glimmer was there. And what I hope for every student who comes to MIT is that each of them discovers the thing that really makes his or her heart sing while they're here. And as you know, happily, I was led to the thing that made my heart sing through my experience at Rochester, but it was not in studying that I discovered it. But I had a faculty member who I went to see after class one day who had great class. I mean, again, so finally, close to the end of my time at Rochester, a class in cell biology, which was a field that was just exploding in late 60s, early 70s, largely through the electron microscope and other new technologies. And in talking with him about a problem he had posed in class, I happened to reveal my own conflict that I didn't think that medical school was the right direction for me, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And he looked at me and said, well, you should get a job in a lab. And it's one of these things about another, you know, and the door opened.
But didn't you also suggest a solution to the very problem he had posed?
I did.
You're burying the headline there.
Yeah, well, you know, that wasn't, that was easy. I brought that into the office. What I left the office with was a path to my future.
And his response to your saying, well, I bet you could probably solve this problem if you looked at it this way, was what?
Oh, well, why don't you do that? I said, how could I do that? And he said, you know, you do that working in a lab.
Now, was your question, how can I do that, in any way influenced by a sense that there were limits for women in science, a sense that you were supposed to go to med school, a sense that I wasn't a scientist because I haven't got a science card in my wallet or something. What were the limitations?
It was not knowing that there was a path, not knowing that there was a world of being a scientist. Even though I knew scientists, when my parents had some friends who were scientists, but I didn't understand what it was they did, and I couldn't connect the thing, that glimmer of something that I loved, with what they were doing. So I just didn't understand. And this professor, Professor K, took these various disconnected pieces of my experience and put them together in a way that made sense. And so it wasn't, I didn't feel as though, there were artificial barriers or boundaries. I just didn't know. I just didn't know. And that's this whole theme of opening up possibility, revealing possibility where you didn't know there was anything there, was creating something out of nothing, right?
And also going from passive to active.
Yes.
A life becomes a biography in that moment. That's how science happens.
Yes.
Seems like a pretty extraordinary insight, even though you seem to describe it as having come relatively late. It's a great insight that seems to have been relevant all throughout your career.
Oh, it was, it was a moment that changed my life, but also a moment that allowed me to understand the world and people in a completely new way. Completely new way.
What a gift.
Yeah, extraordinary. Lucky. And so I described this thing about, finding the thing that made my heart sing. And, I kind of assumed everyone would do that. I wish everyone could do that. I wish everyone could be so fortunate as to find the thing that makes your heart sing and then be able to actually run with it. Hugely fortunate.
And a mission that you, I think of as part of your presidency here.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So what you'll get to at some point, I know, is becoming dean of the graduate school at Yale.
Yeah, we'll go there in a moment. But
yeah,
but I mean,
it was a piece of that.
Yeah. So describe your first experiences with an electron microscope.
So when you see a structure and you think that if you expand it 100-fold, so if you look at the distance between the table and the chair here, and if you were to blow it up, it's still going to be space, right? Well, that's not actually true, because if you blow it up, then you can actually see the details of the structure that's there. And it's incredibly exciting to actually see how those structures build to the structures that you can see with the naked eye or with the light microscope. So for me, the electron microscope was just, exciting doesn't begin to describe it. Breathtaking, just breathtaking. And it was, let's see, I got into lab in 1973, in the spring semester of 73, and I had been studying electron microscopy in a book, right, in a class. Completely different to actually get in there and drive the microscope yourself. And the electron microscope is a bizarre instrument because you sit, I don't know, I haven't been in an electron microscope in years, so probably you don't do this anymore, but at the time I used one, you sit in a completely darkened room and stare at a little fluorescent screen that would fluoresce with the image of these electrons hitting it. And so it was all kind of spooky. It was like being in a submarine or something. You had these controls and you're staring through a little port because it was all under a huge vacuum. So it was all a little strange, but allowed you to focus completely. No distractions outside of this screen where you were looking at the specimen you were examining.
The transition, your graduate school experience is, it seems to me, is about this transition from knowing science to doing science. Describe what that was like as you went to Georgetown and had an experience at the NIH. And
So I was, again, enormously fortunate because I worked in a lab. I was a lab tech for 2 years doing electron microscopy and learning how to do science, learning the practical things of how to do science, learning how to read the literature, learning how to develop a protocol for a set of experiments. So I just got practical training. And then when I went to graduate school, the transition was from taking the practical training, doing someone else's experiments, to the next step of figuring out a problem with the help of an advisor, and I think this is very important. It's a magnificent relationship. People often stereotype this in ways that I think are quite unfair. And then, you know, building the structure that allows you to go after a particular question, a particular problem. And so to move from being a technician to being a key member of the intellectual team that frames the problem. Framing a problem is very difficult. And then devising the method to solve it, and easy enough to say, but that's just trial and error. I mean, it's not just trial and error, it's informed trial and error, but it's doing an experiment 10 times before it works once. And, you know, that, you know, advancing the knowledge step by step and doing that in conversation with other people, again, wonderful, just wonderful. And I was very fortunate because before the end of my first semester at Georgetown, I got a job in a lab at NIH, and so my dissertation work was all done at the National Institutes of Health in a group where they had never had a graduate student before. And so lucky me, I was treated like a postdoc, so I kind of got elevated.
Why was that, though? I mean, the reason that was the case had to do with the nature of your advisor.
It had to do with the nature of my advisor and a wonderful man, Steve Goebel. It also had to do with the fact that I had already done the boot camp, and so I had already learned how to work in a lab. I had already learned how to handle chemicals and scales and all the machinery that you need to do, and I wasn't making a mess. So I was value added for them. And wow, I just attributed to my technical skills. Now thinking back, I was value added in terms of my intellectual skills as well. And it was, you know, incredibly exciting. My advisor had never had a graduate student before. He had only had a couple of postdocs, so he didn't know he was supposed to treat me differently from a colleague. And so it was perfect time for me, you know, in terms of the development of my technical intellectual abilities, and very exciting because of what the lab was doing. So if I had, you know, perhaps if I had done my dissertation work in a laboratory at Georgetown, my guess is it would have been more strictly disciplinary. But I was with a group, a pain research group, not the neuroanatomy group. I was with a pain research group at the NIH. And so there were anatomists. My advisor was an anatomist. There were physiologists, there were clinicians, there were biochemists, there were pharmacologists. It was this crazy mix of people all studying pain, with the idea if we understood how the brain processes pain, we can understand how to alleviate it. And you know, this is how I grew up. This was my critical period for doing science. And so this is where I came to just assume that science is done in a cross-disciplinary way. That anatomists by themselves can't solve the problems. You need to talk to the pharmacologists and the physiologists and the clinicians. And you know, in retrospect, that was an incredibly important experience as a graduate student, to be in a mix of people bringing different perspectives, different technologies to a particular task, a particular problem.
It also seems to be a very important experience for a future administrator to see how the quality of the research is dependent upon the vision to get the right people together. Did you, I mean, perhaps you didn't recognize it at the time, but is that experience at NIH an important model for the administration of large-scale research?
Yes, but I would again take turn we've just said a little bit on its head.
Please.
It's about creating opportunity. It's not, you know, going out and picking you and you. You know, I mean, I pick my dream team in terms of the people I work with, but I work in a particular way, and so not everyone wants to work with me, and not everyone wants to be at MIT. Not everyone wants to think outside their disciplines. And so it creates an opportunity for a certain kind of person, a certain kind of work. And that's, so, what control do I have over it? I have creating opportunity, creating personality, creating a kind of culture that attracts a certain kind of person. And not to say that I'm going out and saying, I'm going to choose you and you and you because you fit. One of the great compliments I got, and I was puzzled by it when I was putting together my senior team, someone said, "Oh, I get it. Everyone you've hired is the same." I was thinking, how could they be the same? They're all fantastically different, but they are the same in a certain attitude, a certain perspective on the world, but they're as different as can be because they have to do very different jobs.
So at an early stage, as a graduate student, you discover the value of interdisciplinary research. It sounds to me like you're saying there that that's been a difficult, as intuitive as that was for you as a graduate student, that's been a difficult model to apply broadly, given the way science is done in the United States. True?
Yes. Yes. It's hard. But so I'm a zealot about this. It is a very important way to make progress. I'm not going to say it's the only way to make progress, because there are great discoveries and great advances that come out of more narrowly defined activities. But for me, and for a certain kind of person, progress can be made at an extraordinary pace by taking down the walls between disciplines.
Well, we'll come back to this as we talk about your experience here, but let's get you to Yale. The experience at Georgetown, it seems to me, allowed you to fall in love with the discovery of the outer reaches of science, but also to fall in love with the brain in a certain sense. Give us a sense of your discovery, both at Georgetown and then on at Yale, that study of the brain was to be what you would do.
Yeah, so that started my first, my job that, I finished Rochester a semester early, and the job that I took at the University of Rochester Medical School was in a neuroanatomy lab. So I got into the brain fairly fast. And it wasn't by choice. It wasn't choosing neuroscience. It was choosing electron microscopy that got me into the brain. And it's a great delight to be a neuroscientist. And I often say it's great because you can think about the enormous questions for mankind, full of philosophical and psychological questions, but still be grounded in something that really is quite rational, quite provable, quite scientific. And I think that's probably what kept me in brain research rather than moving to another area. The opportunities are enormous, and I think it's just as the ability to explore the unknown is great in neuroscience. And the rate of change in neuroscience research since I graduated in 1979, those last 2 decades of the 20th century, the amount of neuroscience knowledge that we gained in those 20 years probably, was easily equivalent to, the 100 years before. So the technologies became sufficiently sophisticated. A lot of technologies became sufficiently sophisticated to allow us to explore the brain. So it's been exciting to be part of a discipline, or it's not a discipline, it's a set of disciplines, where the progress is staggering. Fields wax and wane in terms of coming up with really transformational ideas. And I guess wherever people are doing research, you're making progress. But I think the thing that was particularly exciting about neuroscience is that it seemed like every 6 months or so you just kind of throw away all that stuff that people believe. So, well, that's not true, because the paradigm was changed. And so this idea of a Kuhnian view that you do standard science, which can progress quite rapidly, but it's the paradigm shifting science that is breathtaking. And that seemed to be happening that happened at an extraordinary rate.
And you were seeing that and had the excitement of that at Georgetown and when you moved on to Yale.
Yes. Yeah, so at Georgetown, I postdoced at UC San Francisco for a year. Again, a lot of people just kind of opening up new avenues of inquiry in neuroscience. Then I was at the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory for 5 years, and that was an enormously important period for me because I was educated as a neuroanatomist, and Cold Spring Harbor was about molecular biology, and I had not, for neuroscience, there wasn't any reason to pay attention to molecular biology because it wasn't relevant yet. It became relevant in the late 70s. The Cold Spring Harbor Symposium on Quantitative Biology in 1980 was on the brain. And I think many people would mark that as the, when the starting gun went off for molecular biology. And so I had the opportunity to learn molecular biology while doing neuroscience at Cold Spring Harbor, and it was an important time for neuroscience and really exciting for me to be a participant.
Recall the invitation to Cold Spring and how that came about.
I had not yet finished my first year of postdoc, and I went to Cold Spring Harbor to participate in a workshop. Cold Spring Harbor does a lot of these postgraduate activities to help people get up to the state of the art. And so I went to be part of a pain workshop to talk about and think about new ways to approach pain research. And two scientists at Cold Spring Harbor had just made some monoclonal antibodies that recognized cells in the nervous system of the leech. And I was talking to one of these scientists, and she showed me these photographs of the leech nervous system stained with monoclonal antibodies, so lighting up the nervous system in extraordinary ways. And I, again, remember viscerally the feeling as she went through these photographs of being mesmerized. So if you look at the nervous system of any organism, a human, a rat, a mouse, a leech, you can't see very much. It's the same thing about, it all looks kind of the same. It looks like, a piece of manila folder. You just can't, it doesn't have much natural anatomy to it, much natural structure to it. But if you put it under a microscope, there's incredibly beautiful structure. And one of the questions is, how do you determine which pieces of this thing are doing what jobs? And so what these antibodies allowed you to do was pull out particular cells and particular pathways in ways we hadn't seen before. And basically, if there's a biochemical difference, it means there's going to be a functional difference too. So it provided a way to really start dissecting the brain in a new way. And so,
and just to make the point, up to that time, I mean, the techniques for putting brain tissue with function were incredibly crude. This got you down to the cellular level.
Yeah.
You could put an electrode here and see what moved, but suddenly we're at a point where you can actually theorize about individual cells or groups of cells.
Yes, individual cells are groups of cells. It's groups of cells because Ramon y Cajal in the 19th century figured out how to stain the brain so one cell would get stained, and you could actually see that a nerve cell was this incredibly complex cell. But that cell wasn't attached to the next cell in the pathway. It was just that cell by itself, and you didn't know how many of those cells there were. If that was just a single cell, or if it was surrounded by 10 cells like it. So it allowed you to look at categories of cells. So really put together functional networks was the idea. And so as an anatomist, I looked at these pictures and I said, wow, that's weird. This particular antibody stains 6 cells, these 6 cells, and this antibody stains 4 cells, and they overlap with these 6 cells. What the heck is, what's different? And so my thing was, well, what is this? Is it seeing the cell membrane? Is that what is different? Is it seeing something about the, some internal structure in these cells? What's different between these two things? So that's a question that electron microscope can solve. And so on the side, while I was doing this pain workshop, I was doing my neuroanatomy on these leech antibodies. And at the end of the 3 weeks, I was asked if I might consider joining Cold Spring Harbor. And
this was like a memo that came in your inbox?
yeah, it was like someone who came up to me and said, would you think about coming here?
Who was that?
I think it was the woman who, one of these two scientists who had done this incredible monoclonal antibody study. And I said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, sure. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I thought it was, I didn't think very far down the pike. It was, the opportunity to work on these antibodies was really, I couldn't not do it. In any case, and so she said, well, I have to come back and talk to Jim Watson. I said, well, sure. So I went to visit some friends in Washington and drove back and talked to Jim Watson, and he offered me a job.
What was the pitch from Professor Watson, Dr. Watson?
The pitch. It's very interesting. It wasn't in a sense there was a pitch. There was a conversation about antibodies. We talked about the antibodies, and I talked about what I had seen and what I thought could be done. And he talked about his sense of neuroscience being a very important area of research for the lab. And it was all really quite informal.
The sense of mentoring wasn't so much of an issue as the idea that you were a part of this movement.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And he was an extraordinary mentor. I'm just an extraordinary mentor, and it's by virtue of these conversations. And mentors are thought partners. And as thought partners, they are door openers or window openers. And when I have done what is called mentoring students or postdocs or colleagues, it's about a conversation about their hopes and dreams, and it has to be something that I'm excited about too. And through that conversation, I don't know in advance what I'm going to advise, but it's through a conversation that opportunities are revealed that people can take that they didn't know and I didn't know existed before we had the conversation often. And this is part of Jim Watson's genius.
What kind of an environment was Cold Spring Harbor for you?
It was very intense. It was I mark it as the first really high-powered intellectual environment in which I allowed myself to participate, I guess. It's a very intense and wonderful place. And in many ways, it's like MIT. It's, people racing to invent the future in a nonstop way. And it's a place, again, that, the thing that bounds you at Cold Spring Harbor is your own mind. So as fast as you can think, as well as you can think, the resources are there to put those thoughts into action. And, for me, that is the ideal educational or research environment. You want the thing that limits people's advance to be their minds and not the physical, resources, not the state of the labs or the ability to muster the resources to get an experiment done.
You've described that part of the excitement of neuroscience is the scope of it, in the sense that you can inquire about philosophical questions, perceptual questions, chemical questions, biological questions, physical questions simultaneously. In that sense, is a liberal institution like Yale an ideal place for a Susan Hockfield at this stage of her research and development?
It was outstanding for me to move from Cold Spring Harbor to Yale. Again, perfect timing. I had learned a considerable amount of molecular biology, had put together a technical toolkit and an intellectual toolkit to pursue the science. And there weren't many neuroscientists at Cold Spring Harbor, which allowed me the luxury of focusing on molecular biology and being then ready to apply these tools to neuroscience questions, it was marvelous to move to an environment where, I don't remember, there were 85, 90 neuroscientists at Yale. It was a terrific neuroscience community. And to bring this new perspective that I gained from being at Cold Spring Harbor to a community of neuroscientists and the greater liberal arts, philosophers, psychologists, chemists. It was, again, very exciting, very productive place to be.
To really draw an arc from the great conversations around your dinner table as you were growing up in Chappaqua and other places, but as pretty much of a nomad as a child because your dad moved around a lot, to the community of Yale, which is very much a warm community within walls where there is just a lot of a sense of we are all family here. How important was the discovery of those various communities as you moved through your academic life?
I think, for me, very, really important. There are people who work better by themselves and people who work better with others, and I really like to work with other people. Jim Watson always says he likes to hang around with people who are smarter than he is. I love hanging around with people who are, way smarter than I am. It's exciting and interesting, and it certainly amplifies, my ability to understand the world. And so these communities were important. Yale offered something that was ended up being, again, changing my life and determining my career trajectory that brought me here, which is that each of the residential colleges has a group of faculty fellows, and I was invited to join one of these, and it was in that context that I got to have great conversations with people in art history and chemistry and astronomy and the biology department and the history department, and really extended my intellectual community across the expanse of Yale. And that was terrific, but it was also the thing that kind of put me in the sights of some when the dean of the graduate school position opened up.
How quickly did you discover that the way Yale organized itself allowed, if not actually, but certainly the potential for this great kind of mixing and sharing?
Oh, instantly. In terms of neuroscience, I was very excited to be there. And when I first got there, I just called everyone whose papers I had read and said, well, could we get together for lunch? I mean, what a delight to be there. And part of the reason I knew I could do that was Cold Spring Harbor has this very interesting patterns during the summer. The place has a huge number of courses and symposia and meetings. And so during the summer there'd be scientists from all over the world, very interactive, very social, and then during the rest of the year it was you're in your lab doing your work. And so the sense that when people were around you, engaged with them, you had conversations, you actually did science socially, was something that was really quite natural to me coming out of Cold Spring Harbor.
I suspect there were encounters that you arranged at Yale that represented a particularly just joyful set of contrasts. Can you describe a particular lunch or a dinner or an event or a colloquium that where you said to yourself, man, this is great. There's over here this person and this person and this person. Man, we're cooking with gas now.
Oh yeah. I mean, so I'll tell you a neuroscience one. The Department of Molecular and Cellular Physiology had a seminar every Thursday, and one of the first years I was there, a young colleague organized, and it was about molecular neurobiology. So every Thursday, people who were interested in this new field would come together from all over campus and hear, someone talk about this new field. And of course, the conversation continued from week to week to week. And you'd sit there with people from, literally all over campus. You got to know them. So there was a group probably of 25 or 30 of us. And it was fantastic. Then in the Berkeley College Faculty Fellows, I remember hearing a lecture. So each of the fellows, the fellows would give the lectures. And then we'd have dinner and discussion. And a member of the physics department, Charlie Balte, was talking about something called gravitational lensing. Very exciting. And it was just, again, kind of breathtaking. And he was there, and someone asked, what is there, beyond the expanding universe? And so there's a little conversation about what there is, beyond it. And one of the faculty members from the divinity school in the Department of Religious Studies said, well, what's beyond that is the mind of God. And I thought, what an incredible conversation to have the chemists and the cell biologists and the physicists and the historians and religious studies professors, all talking about the universe is quite a privilege.
And so let's just spend a little time talking about the science that you're most proud of and the research that you're most proud of. How did you enter into the study that would, in your view, define you as a scientist?
Yeah, so I think it is this monoclonal antibody history. So it was getting to Cold Spring Harbor and having access to a technology that was new, that allowed us to see the brain in a new way and the components of the brain in a new way. And so I think my most important contribution was discovering a structure and a set of proteins that play a role in closing what we call critical periods in development. So there are periods when the brain is plastic, the connections between nerve cells, the circuitry is being modified. It's laid down when we're born, but then it's modified based on experience. So how you use the brain, how you use your eyes early in your life determines the wiring of the visual system. And it is quite susceptible to experience. At the end of that plastic period, many of these circuits are established essentially for the rest of your life. And the mechanism of that stabilization really was not at all known. And so I described, as I said, a gene and a group of its protein products that play a role in that stabilization. But probably more importantly, what I showed is that if an animal or a human has a particular set of unusual circumstances, say if a child is born with a cataract and that cataract is not removed, the eye will become blind. And even if the cataract is removed when that person is 20 or 40, you would get some enhancement of visual ability, but you'll never recover full visual ability of that eye. And it's because the connections between that eye, the deprived eye, and the brain have developed abnormally, and they've been fixed in place. Because during the plastic period, during the critical period, that eye was not connected correctly to the brain. And what I showed is that that those differences in experience actually have a biochemical effect on the brain. So those parts of the brain, the biochemistry of those parts of the brain are also unusual, and unusual forever following early deprivation. And so that's important because it shows a biochemical molecular substrate. And then you can actually get at it. You can think about how you could change it if you understand what the mechanism is of aberrant function. The other important piece of this was that if you can identify the proteins or the structures that prevent reorganization in the adult, and it's very important that we have these things, or we'd all be kind of babbling forever and searching for language rather than actually having language you can use. The reason that as adults we recover poorly from neurologic injury or stroke is because the brain doesn't rewire easily in the adult. And if we understand the components that prevent that rewiring, there's a possibility of, perhaps removing those components so that rewiring could happen, and then allowing those components to reform. And so my contribution was really beginning to understand why, what fixes the brain's connectivity in place once it's laid down, and therefore what is it that prevents the brain from reorganizing in the adult.
your lifetime has been about discovering this mechanism for closing the plastic period in the brain. Do you think in your lifetime a mechanism for reopening that plastic period will be found, in which case all kinds of therapies could be imagined from something like that?
Yeah, a lot of progress has been made. So, I think we will understand some of it. The problem with biology, it's always a lot more complicated than we imagine at any moment. So we already have some idea of how you can, open the brain to plasticity. The real question is, what's the pace of that translating into a clinically effective intervention? And that's harder to predict. But I think we are understanding a lot more about it. And, the work I did actually, set up the possibility of discovering how to return the brain to a plastic state. And other people have shown that that is indeed the case. But again, it's early days, and understanding in greater depth what goes on so that it might be possible to use in humans is, I can't make a prediction about that.
What drew you to the study of glial cells in the brain?
Oh, as many things, it was kind of an accident. And I was very interested in, we were trying to clone the gene for this protein we had discovered that we believe stabilizes the adult circuitry. And when you're cloning things, you often come up on family members rather than the family member you want. It's another member of the family that you're not that interested in. And so in looking at the possible genes for this protein, one of my postdocs pulled out a gene that didn't have an expression pattern in neurons, which we were looking for, but instead was expressed in glial cells. And to test whether it was the right gene, we looked at expression over development. They're just kind of standard things, standard tests you put the gene to. And this one was very strange. It didn't look like what we had expected at all, and in fact ended up being a glial cell gene. And
expressed in almost every case.
Well, it ended up being expressed in every glioma, every brain tumor cell, yeah. And that's an interesting story because, again, so much of what we do is a bit by accident, but earlier on I talked about one of the most important things is being able to actually see when something is not just an artifact, but is actually showing you something that's different. And we had cloned the gene. We had shown that it was expressed at very high levels when glial cells are first being born and starting to move around. And my husband's a neuro-oncologist. And I think it was a Saturday at lunch. We were in our kitchen. I remember the conversation. And I was explaining my frustration in this particular gene having an unusual expression pattern being expressed when glial cells were dividing. And as a neuro-oncologist, he said, well, it might be interesting to see if it was expressed in glioma. Glioma being a brain cancer derived from glial cells, where there's a lot of cell division going on. So, of course, it made some sense. So we looked in glioma, and first couple of samples we looked at, sure enough, it was expressed at astonishingly high levels. And then we did a larger study and found that in every glioma we got our hands on, just about, it was expressed at very high levels. And it ended up in that this particular gene was a very good marker, very selective marker for glioma in the adult, because in the adult, the gene, the protein variant we were studying is expressed at very low levels. And so when I left the lab, we were pursuing this particular gene and its protein products as a diagnostic agent for glioma and potentially a therapeutic agent as well.
Describe the transition that took place at Yale when you went from research to being an administrator, and we're in a position really to be a mentor in a big way for other people at Yale.
So I became dean of the graduate school and kept my lab, and I intended to be dean for only a few years, fix a few things, and then go back to the lab because my career trajectory never included being a dean or any other kind of central administrator. I was thinking that I might share a department someday, but I didn't really think that I'd do anything beyond that. And so I kept my lab, and I spent most Fridays in the lab, and I had a great group at the time. So the deanship for me happened at a perfect time. We had just kind of moved into a new period of fairly standard practice. When you're working at the paradigm shifting part, you've got to do that, 24/7. But we had just kind of, broken through to a period where we needed to do a tremendous amount of standard science. I had great people in the lab doing that, and so I could spend one day a week in the lab and actually continue to make fairly good progress. But the reason I accepted being dean of the graduate school at the time was, for me, graduate school was transformational. I mean, a lot of people say that it's their undergraduate period that made them the people they are. For me, it was my graduate school experience that made me the person I am. That really, laid the path for my career. And it was a delightful time for me. Besides being transformational, it was exciting and interesting, and to be with people who were interested in the thing you're interested in, be able to focus on it monomaniacally, and the company of people who could do that also was just a gift.
And for you at that moment at Yale, your experience of grad school was infinite freedom, being around the people that had the same passions as you, and being able to go flat out.
Yes.
These were not the freedoms that you discovered in grad students at Yale.
Well, many of them were not having that experience. For many graduate students at Yale, many, unarticulate, many, or some I think who just weren't even talking about it, graduate school at Yale was not the great liberation. It was not this, marvelous entry into the life of the mind that I had experienced. And it seemed to me an extraordinary waste of resources, because Yale is a marvelous university. And if any place, there are, great universities, research universities all over America, but the best of them certainly should offer this kind of experience to as many graduate students as possible. And I saw there were a number of just small things, I called it just, kind of picking up the garbage. There were things that could be done to make it possible for more graduate students to have this, experience of self-definition and intellectual liberation. And so I accepted being dean of the graduate school because I saw a couple of ways we could just kind of get the school on track. And my views of what could be done and the President Rick Levin's views were really in good alignment. And so I figured I'd do that for a couple of years and then go back to the lab.
What did Levin see in you as an administrator, do you think?
I think part of it was, again, a real commitment to graduate education as the life-transforming experience that education should be. What I often say, if you come to MIT and you don't discover something new about yourself or something new you can do, we're not doing our job. And so education is about opening doors, opening windows, creating opportunities that people didn't know they had before. And I think that approach, that understanding of graduate education is really at the apex of an educational experience, was part of it. Part of it also was I think is I'm a collaborative person. I like working with people, and I think that's for Rick, he really has cultivated a group of deans and higher administrators who work that way, and so we resonated in terms of work style.
How did you respond to the suspicion that it's time we had a woman here doing this kind of thing?
Well, I don't. Judy Roden had been dean of the graduate school. You forget. I forget. And frankly, I was not often aware of what possible impediments there might be. Judith Roden was, I think, outside of the School of Nursing, perhaps the first woman dean of the school at Yale. So it only happened, a couple of years before I became dean. So I don't think it was, Rick did a great job, and it continues to do a great job of finding talent in unusual places, that is, not according to the standard model. But Allison Richard was provost, and so I don't think it wasn't about having a woman. And one of my colleagues said to me at one point, he said, "Well, I know why you're dean of the graduate school." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you're a scientist." And I said, "Great, marvelous." And I think that actually was part of it, because the four central leaders of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Yale are the president, the provost, the dean of the college, and the dean of the graduate school. There is not a dean of the faculty there. That role is served by the deans of the college and the graduate school. And among those four, there was an effort to get some balance among the disciplines.
Affirmative action for scientists.
Absolutely.
There we go.
There's some places where you need to do that.
Yeah. Well, success with Rick Levin certainly attracts the attention of the entire academic community in the United States in terms of who's a candidate to run a major institution. Were you aware of that?
No, certainly not when I became dean, because I wasn't planning to go anywhere except back to the lab and maybe chair a department someday. So I was not aware of it, and it was of no concern to me.
How did the invitation to be the president of MIT come about?
Well, not knowing that, coming out of the Levin School of College and University Leadership, the Yale School, was going to make me a candidate for things. I think I got my the first inquiry about being president of a college within, 2 years of starting as dean of the graduate school. A little premature, so lots of interest from very early days, and many expressions of interest, inquiries whether I would be interested. Just weren't particularly compelling, because at that time I was provost, so if I was dean of the graduate school, then I became provost, and being a scientist and provost at Yale under Rick's leadership was really exciting. He's wonderful to work with. The team is always great, and he manages his leadership team in a way that encourages collaborative thinking. And Yale was building in science and engineering and biomedicine while I was provost, so it was an exciting time to work with Rick at Yale, so easy enough to keep my mind focused on that. The inquiry from MIT I had not anticipated for many reasons, and so I was not entirely surprised when it came in, because at some level there was some interest, but I didn't really think I would be a strong candidate here.
Why?
I'm the first life scientist to be president of MIT. I don't think MIT was looking for a biologist or a life scientist to be president. So I didn't really match what I assumed would be the search image. It's a very different place from Yale. And so a lot of the things that MIT does are not areas in which I could have had any experience coming out of Yale University. And so my expectation was that they would be looking for someone who would bring strength in areas of MIT's strengths. And as I said, I didn't imagine that the match was going to be appropriate.
When did that change?
Over the course of the search committee's interview process. I didn't think that it would be a great match as far as my perspective, and I didn't think it would be a great match from MIT's perspective, but that proved wrong.
And did those discussions go along the lines of you perhaps selling them on the idea that your interest in the structure of things is a universal interest, and that's what science is all about, the kinds of conversations we've been having here, and you seeing them getting it, and all of a sudden something could happen here?
No.
Right.
And no, but for the same reason that has been the theme of much of our discussion this afternoon. So I met with I don't know whether there's 22 or 25 members of a search committee. MIT has very large committees, something that I found quite surprising. And my first conversation was with a very large subset, almost the entire search committee. And it was simply a conversation, and a conversation about perspectives on education, perspectives on research, perspectives on science and technology, perspective on the nation and where the nation is going. It was simply a conversation. I was not selling. They weren't selling. We were just talking about the important ideas in higher education and research. And it was an exciting conversation, a very exciting conversation.
The conversation suggested that those rules really didn't apply, perhaps.
Right, the rules, the strict delimiters of what the search image might be were irrelevant. Not irrelevant, but were not the most critically important features.
And did that say to you, I could do this, I want to do this, this is the natural next step for Susan Hockfield?
Yeah, it took a while of understanding more about MIT and more about the people of MIT and the aspirations, and not that I could lead MIT to do this or that, but that it would be a place of greater opportunity for let me actually step back, that it would be a place, a match that would allow MIT to flourish. And so for me, this really was a call to service. And I didn't enter into this thinking, people often ask if I'm having fun. I said, that's not the point. The point is, I mean, maybe you'll have fun too, but the point is really whether in these roles we can increase opportunity, open windows, open doors, reveal avenues of work, opportunities to serve that maybe we didn't see before. Expand the potential.
You described the reinvigoration of the graduate school process at Yale as beginning with the picking up of the garbage. Not to torture a metaphor, but was there plenty of that to do as you arrived here at MIT?
It's interesting. Everyone who comes into any of these positions sees things that are just kind of out of kilter. And that's a great advantage of coming from the outside. I think that's part of what Levin saw about me in the graduate school. I wasn't kind of part of the FAS graduate or the graduate school universe in a formal way. So I came to it with a different perspective. And it was the same thing here. I saw things that were just a little out of kilter. And it's a little bit kind of like bumps in the road. So if we could just smooth that bump, it would be we could really accelerate.
So part of your power and I think value to the institution comes from the permission to say, why is this like this?
Exactly. Yeah. And not just assuming that it's like this and it's always been like this, so we should just accept it. And that's the advantage of, again, bringing a different perspective, and that, again, why having people talk together across disciplines who don't bring the same sets of assumptions to the problem can be enormously productive.
What was your first inkling of the potential for cross-disciplinary work at MIT that maybe was an order of magnitude beyond what you'd experienced in the past? Orders of magnitude beyond anything I'd experienced in the past, and it's MIT's great history in cross-disciplinary work.
So after World War II, and I don't know if there is a history that predates that, the RAD Lab transitioned into the Research Lab for Electronics, or what's now called the Research Lab for Electronics. And this is a cauldron of collaboration of the sort that you could only dream about. So in the 50s, MIT already had organizational structures that brought together physicists and electrical engineers and chemists and, who knows what the crazy mix was that allowed people to, cohabitate in ways that you just can't do if the physicists have to remain in the physics department and the chemists have to remain in the chemistry department, and the electrical engineers and computer scientists have to remain in forget about the electrical engineering computer science department, have to remain in the School of Engineering, and the physicists have to stay in the School of Science. So MIT had already invented a structure that allowed people to mix. So RLE, the Computer Science Artificial Intelligence Lab, we have a lot of these research labs and centers that are about getting people out of their departments into a mix that is functionally structured rather than administratively structured. So that was part of it. The other, I mean, there are any number of things that just kind of took my breath away when I came to understand what MIT does and how it works. We have, by almost all rankings, the best school of engineering in the world. It's been true for years and years and years. And at Yale, we had worked very hard to design what I think is a very fine department of biomedical engineering. And it's an interesting and great group with faculty members from the School of Medicine and faculty members from the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And we had spent many years designing this and making it work, and I felt kind of proud of what we had accomplished. And I got here, and the magnitude of the conversation between engineers and physical scientists and life scientists was unlike anything I had ever imagined. Tom Magnanti was Dean of the School of Engineering when I arrived, and he told me that a third of the faculty in the School of Engineering, almost 400, were employing the life sciences in their work somehow. A third of 400 engineers. I mean, this is just I had a hard time getting my head around it. But MIT already had the structures that enabled that kind of work. And, we see it everywhere. Now, it's not perfect, so like many things we do, it is a work in progress. So I would never say that MIT has cross-disciplinary work nailed. We don't. It's hard to do. It needs continual tending. It needs continual encouragement. It demands continual administrative adjustments to make it possible, because there are so many forces that work against it. But MIT is so far down this road, further than I'd ever seen before in my life.
Is a useful metaphor for your mission as administrator a reopening of the plastic period of the rewiring of the intelligence of MIT?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, sustaining that plastic period. Everyone who's been part of any kind of organizations knows that the startup phase is particularly exciting. One of the reasons the startup phase is exciting is that everybody's trying to figure out, who to talk to. What's the organization? What's going to work? And so there's a tremendous amount of testing and experimenting, and there's some inefficiency in that, of course, because the reason that mature organizations have less fluid structures is because more static structures work well. But there's a tremendous excitement and opportunity for exploration in that startup phase. And so, yes, that's beautifully put, and I hadn't thought of that myself. That part of my role as president here is to keep the critical period open, keep the plastic period open, or reopen it in places where it is currently not open.
Empower it to be reopened.
Yes.
At the appropriate time.
Yeah, that's quite nice. Thank you.
Oh,
thank you.
It's all yours.
I'll use that. Thank you.
What do people outside of MIT typically get wrong about the identity of this institution?
Ah, boy. One of the things, I knew MIT was a very good place, or, you don't leave Yale University to go to a place that doesn't have, great intellectual strengths, but the power of the place is, I think, not fully appreciated. It is excellent in ways that are hard to describe.
Let me throw some myths at you then, and you can shoot them down. It's all men around here.
Yeah, well, not anymore. 46% of the undergraduates are women. 30% of the graduate students are women. We're making progress on the faculty, so we're over 20% of the faculty are women. But it's not all guys anymore. Most important statistic I think about the women undergraduates is when I tell people, surprise, 46%, 45, 46% of the undergraduates are women. People say, oh, well, but they're all majoring in, political science or not science or engineering. And that's wrong. So 85% of our bachelor's degrees are in science or engineering. 85% of the men, 85% of the women are getting degrees in science and engineering. Now, that's great. Nationally, 15%, 15% of bachelor's degrees in the United States are in science or natural sciences or engineering. Astonishing. But in any case, so that's a myth buster, that there are women at MIT, and guess what? We have engineering departments with more women majors than men. We have science departments with more women majors than men.
MIT, tough place for minorities.
You know, it's a tough place for everybody. It's a tough place for everybody. Our standards are high. We raise the bar for one another, and you know, we do our best to make sure that people can perform at the level of their ambitions and their abilities, and our minority students are astonishingly good. And we do a very big reach to them. And we have a lot of programs to help people succeed who, you know, might not because of, you know, whatever their, you know, previous conditions were, current conditions. So we make a very, very big effort for, you know, minorities, women to not just survive, but to thrive at MIT.
Certainly the narrative with some of your predecessors has been this struggle to maintain a balance between the welcoming of the institution of MIT, the embracing quality, but also the set of very high expectations and keeping the bar high. How big of a challenge is that for you as president?
You know, I don't, I think the hard thing is helping people to get over their stereotypes, you know, getting over their assumptions. We don't admit anyone to MIT, any of the undergraduates, graduate students who we don't think is going to be able to be a smashing success here. But we know it's hard. We know it's hard, and it has to be hard. We've got to challenge people. I think, you know, people deride competition. I think competition is a powerful motivator for human behavior, and, you know, it helps to have, you know, you can run, most of us can run, you know, pretty fast on our own. Intellectually, I'm a lousy runner. But if someone's chasing you, you can run a little faster. And I think getting that balance right is important. And, you know, the fact is, it's not always comfortable to be pushed. But, boy, just, you know, that little bit of discomfort can get you to do things that you wouldn't have done otherwise. And so it's an environment that tests all of us. And that's an important piece of it. And I think the balance is how hard you push, and how hard, you know, and you know, I don't want to. It's hard to. Let me back up, because I think we have to create high expectations. We have to create, or we have high expectations. We have to maintain our high expectations. We have to, you know, maintain a kind of healthy competition. Another myth buster is that the students work together. Tremendous sense of collaboration among the students. And when I first came to MIT, I had a group of students who were my tutors. And I met with them, I think, for maybe, I don't remember, it was 4 or 5 hour-and-a-half sessions. They prepared extensively for these sessions. And one of the sessions we talked about competition. And every place I've been has a different culture around competition, and it's fascinating. And I clearly wasn't getting it. And so finally one of the students, quite exasperated, said, "You just don't get it. At MIT, it doesn't matter so much how far you get, but how many people you bring with you." And so the amount of collaboration among the students is fantastic, because, you know, we push hard. I mean, the expectations are hard, the courses are hard, the courses are graded on a curve, and the students collaborate. So there's a tremendous amount of cooperation and collaboration, even in the context of fierce competition.
Is that experience where you came up with this line from your terrific inaugural address, it's a stadium where there are no seats and everyone's in the game?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, MIT is not right for everyone, and it's not a spectator sport. and so everyone participates, and it's a very exciting place. But it is not a. It would be very hard to find the easy path through MIT. As I said, yeah, a lot of these things end up being self-selecting. So we admit students who choose MIT knowing that the average number of hours that MIT students study is greater than, I think, almost anywhere else. And I think this year probably, you never can rely entirely on these rankings, but our students choose MIT knowing that they'll work harder here than other schools to which they were admitted. Mm-hmm. And I find that incredibly exciting.
One other myth, tough place for a poet.
We probably don't have many poets. We have some spectacular poets. And while we don't have as many poets as we have engineers, the quality of our humanities and social sciences is extraordinary. Our linguistics group is always ranked #1. Economics is always in the very top group. Philosophy is hard to rank, but philosophers have their own ranking systems, and we're usually in the top 5, if not the top 5, the top 10. We have some of the most astonishing historians and professors of literature I've ever met. So very strong, but smaller than schools where that's their great strength.
But consistent with your personal sense of the importance of literature and poetry and the humanities in your own life?
We would not serve our community or the world if we did not have strong arts, humanities, and social sciences. We say our mission is to serve the world. Why is the world worth serving? And I think a lot of this sense of who people are, what civilizations are, how they work, our understanding of that and their importance comes out of the humanities and social sciences and the arts, and it is a core part of MIT, serving our students, but also serving the world in a more broader sense.
And so this 5th grader staring astonished and reverentially through a microscope is now quite credibly an important leader in this country for where we go in science and engineering in the United States, a voice upon which a nation, the world, depends on where do we go from here. And this is not a moment like 1957 when the US was challenged by Sputnik and won the race and dominated over everyone else. In many ways, it's quite the reverse. Are you up to that task of being one of those voices and to being a leader as the president of MIT to where we go from here in science?
Well, I would never assert that I am up to the task, but I'm certainly working hard at it because it's absolutely critical. So I am concerned about the nation's trajectory. I'm concerned about the nation's hunger for not being #1, but hunger for the elements that made us #1. So this passion for discovery, this sense that any kid can grow up to be president, the sense that, and one of the things I love about MIT is an unabashed enthusiasm for what I say, good old-fashioned hard work. Paul Gray, so they said that the greatest sin at MIT is sloth. Well, there are not many places in America where sloth is considered a sin. It's usually considered high art. And I think that this idea that you work hard, and if everything's aligned, then you have a chance of succeeding. Nothing's guaranteed. You've got to make your good fortune. The fact that the reason that America industry triumphed in the 20th century, perhaps it was to make America great, but frankly it was about individual people having great ideas and knowing that they can turn those great ideas into products and businesses. Having the conditions that allow that to happen you know, one would hope we still have that. I'm not sure we do. The United States has backed off on its funding of research. You know, so this has been absolutely critical to our success. The genius coming out of World War II to avoid a depression when all those young people came home, the GI Bill, send them to college. Our enthusiasm for sending young people to college is not as great now as it once was. The other, you know, genius that came out of World War II was witnessing the technological transformation that can happen by, you know, pouring money into research. That, of course, after the war, we said, well, let's keep doing this, thanks to Vannevar Bush. You know, let's keep doing this, but let's turn those technologies into technologies of peace, as well as technologies of defense. You know, produced, you know, the extraordinary technological transformation of the world of the 20th century. It's not so clear that, you know, we're committed to doing that at the same level. One of my great frustrations now is how we're dealing with the energy crisis. Getting ourselves caught up in an argument about whether or not there's anthropogenic global warming. Excuse me. We have hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty who want energy-intensive lifestyles. We have a supply problem. We have a demand problem. We have a national security problem. You don't even have to get to global warming before you recognize that we have to invent the next generation of energy technologies, and somehow, as a nation, we seem incapable of understanding that we have to make decisions that will bring us, you know, well into the 21st century, you know, a new set of technologies, a new set of industries. So I am worried about the nation's passion for invention, and I'm particularly worried because, you know, all around the world, it's such an exciting time, because nations that were, you know, consigned to no more than kind of stumbling through decade after decade of abject poverty for most of their people are now coming out of this, and they all want to build innovation-based economies. They all want MIT to help. And it's, you know, it's the American moment in the sense that this model, this second half of the 20th century model, prevails. And yet we don't seem to be the great proponents of the 20th century model.
Is the MIT Energy Initiative a light for the world, or an argument against dragging your feet by the American government on developing a rational energy policy?
Oh, I think it's both. It's a light for the world. It's a, you know, I hope it's a beacon even for the United States. You know, that we can do this stuff. When I arrived at MIT, I didn't know that MIT was doing energy research of the kind that we are. And frankly, it wasn't clear to me exactly what could be done to begin to change the world's energy system, which is the modest ambition of the Energy Initiative. And in my conversations around campus, you know, my listening tour 1.0, asking people what are our opportunities and responsibilities for the next decade, there was a unanimous call, nearly unanimous call, that we really needed to contribute more than we were to changing the world's energy system. And I discovered experiments, projects in technology and science and policy, you know, in economics that could actually make a difference. And so for me, you know, I went from kind of a passive supporter around changing the world's energy system to a very passionate champion of the possibility of getting things done. And it's because of the things I saw happening on campus. And so I'm hoping that the Energy Initiative is not simply a rhetorical call to action, but a real example of the possibility of making serious change.
But also an example of how the breadth of the initiative is where the progress comes from, in the way that brain science, because of its breadth, that it went from philosophy to molecular biology, and that the questions could be posed in all of those disciplines. You see almost an exact kind of analog in the Energy Initiative, in that there are philosophical questions, economic questions, physical questions, chemical questions, all the way down to psychological questions about how we use energy. And it seems as though the progress in neuroscience is a real model for this kind of broad initiative.
I think that my first, my graduate student lab, in my mind, is the model for how science gets done. The energy initiative is even broader. At the time, I didn't understand how important policy is. I've had so many marvelous teachers here around energy, and so many great lessons I've learned. So among the first several was that, great technology by itself doesn't go anywhere. You need great policy. And so you can't invent the technology without being aware of the kinds of policy that's going to support it, and it's got to be an interplay, and there has to be conversation, and this is so important. One of my favorite lessons is that the rate-limiting technology for all alternative energy technologies is energy storage. Batteries. So I'm a battery nut. And we have, probably 24 new battery technologies under development here. And 200 years without any change in battery technology. This is so exciting. It's like neuroscience. 150 years of just kind of, minute progress, but progress. Then all of a sudden, a huge leap. New set of technologies, a huge leap into new ways of understanding the brain. I mean, battery technology didn't move for 200 years. And now it's not just MIT, but other places. It's just, a field of dreams. So I do think, I think there are appropriate analogies in how I understand we approach problems, but the energy initiative is, broader than anything I've, personally witnessed before. And it's exciting. One of the, when Ernie Moniz and Bob Armstrong and I, the deputy director of the Energy Initiative, kind of sat down to think about how we're going to actually make this thing happen, it was before the Obama administration was in office and before the nation was actually talking about real change in our perspectives on energy. And we sat in my office and kind of recognized the lay of the land. I said, well, I guess we'll have to do it ourselves. And so most of the support for the energy initiative, at least in the early support, has come from industry collaborations. Well, how exciting to be able to partner with industry to accelerate the development of technologies for the marketplace. And that's, that's a place that MIT plays, really well. We protect the academic privacy, kind of the industry removed, the applications removed part of MIT that does the just curiosity-driven research and basic discovery science. That's absolutely critical. We do that at the same time, and frankly, sometimes it's the same lab, sometimes it's the same faculty member that does these advanced applications and spins out, businesses or licenses technology so that we can, really get things into the marketplace. And the energy initiative, kind of allows us to play in these very many dimensions in a very exciting way. And the faculty and the students who are involved in it, of course, have the great thrill of talking to people who are coming to the problem with different perspectives.
If you could go back to University of Rochester and talk to some of those student demonstrators who seemed so distracting at the time about what the future would hold for them, how would you complete this sentence? Make sure you do the following. What lesson would you give? So
let me talk about the students I see at MIT, the 17 to 30-year-olds. I'm kind of testing out this way of talking about them, but I think about them as generation why not. These are students, these are young people, they just roll up their sleeves and get to work. And don't forget to actually do, make things, change things in a practical way. Don't forget to actually get something done. The rhetoric is not enough. And, this for me was the great opportunity I saw at MIT around energy. It wasn't people who were just talking about change. It was people who were getting the change done. figuring out what the impediments were and figuring out how to change the impediments into opportunities. Figuring out where the technological gaps were and how to get past those. Figuring out where the policy gaps were and designing policy to let you get past them. Figuring out the economics of the supply of electricity in the United States and how to redesign that. I mean, astonishing. Practical, real life change. At the same time, imagining the future we have not yet imagined.
Mm. During World War II, the American government came to MIT and said, "Help us win the war." A lot of problems were solved. America won the war. Are the problems more difficult for you and the leadership of MIT if the government were to come and say, "Help us with any number of things that are a problem"?
I know more about science and engineering in the United States than other countries, so let me just talk about the United States. There have been many episodes where we have basically done miracles. The development of radar during World War II, absolutely miraculous. We're only talking about a few years. Take a technology that was developed in England, so we didn't, originate the technology, but it was nowhere near ready for action. And to get it ready for action required new science. It required new physics to be done, and also real applications to be done within a matter of just a few years. In an interesting, semi-technology was turned into the war-winning technology. That's a miracle. Coming out of the world of biomedicine, AIDS went from a disease that no one had heard of and we had no idea what it was, basically defining this as a disease, and it was a death sentence, turning it into a chronic treatable disease in a decade. That's a miracle. That is a medical miracle. In the United States, we've reduced death from heart disease and stroke by 63% over the last 25 years. I'm sorry, when I was a kid, everyone died of heart attacks. A few people die of heart attacks now, but you hardly ever hear about someone having a heart attack. That's a medical miracle. But we've done that through enormous investments and enormous kind of, inspired imagination. So we know we can do it. The challenges around energy are a little different. There are important scientific and technological problems. I think they can be solved. Do I think they're as hard as figuring out how to turn AIDS from a death sentence to a chronic disease? Maybe I'm chauvinistic, but I think that's a harder problem. And we still need a vaccine, and MIT is collaborating with MGH and Harvard to get a vaccine for AIDS, and whether we get it or someone else, a lot of people are working on it. But what we know is that it takes resources, it takes commitment over a very long time. One of our difficulties in energy funding in the United States is it's been a roller coaster. And the problem with a roller coaster is you always come back to the starting gate. There's no progress. You have, kind of, ooh, fun ride, and then we're nowhere. And so we need a sustained commitment. And I think we could transform the world's energy system if we took it on in a serious way. So, I think there are many things about the United States that make it very likely that we could be a leader in this. But there's a lot of great work going on around the world, and it's very exciting that's going around the world. Let me just be sure I get this in, because I think one of the things that concerns me in the national rhetoric, about 40% of our graduate students at MIT are international. They come from other countries. And for graduate work, this is just a race to the top. Our Department of Electrical Engineering, Computer Science, I don't know, it's 6% or 7% of the applicants. This is a place where many people feel you got to be if you're going to be on the cutting edge. And for I would still say the great majority of students who are getting degrees, undergraduate, graduate degrees, yeah, for many of them, if not most of them, their first choice when they leave MIT would be to stay in the United States. And 20 years ago, there weren't many choices of where you could go and use this incredible education that MIT has provided. And so they put up with a lot of, let's just call it the indignities of the American immigration process in order to stay here. Well, things are different now. There are great places around the world where you can go to utilize an MIT education to change the world. And yet our immigration system is just as daunting as it was 20 years ago. Our great strength in this country has been from a set of opportunities, right? It's been our theme this afternoon. And it is to our detriment if we don't figure out how to make it more hospitable, easier for these international graduates of, particularly in science, engineering, technology, to stay in the United States.
Bring down the walls.
Bring down the walls.
Open the doors.
Yeah, staple a green card to every diploma.
It was assumed that because of your interest in the sciences, you'd probably be a doctor.
Yeah.
Didn't turn out that way.
Yeah.
You married an MD. How's that collaboration been?
Oh, terrific. You know, the best of all worlds. And if I had to do over again, might I now do an MD, PhD? Perhaps. My husband, as you know, is a neurologist. His specialty is neuro-oncology, and it has been, an incredible source of joy and inspiration to be able to have dinner table conversations. And I have to say, sometimes we talk about a disease, and sometimes we talk about lab discovery, but very often we talk about those things that neuroscience and neurology allows us to talk about, which is the capacity and the responsibilities of the human brain.
A worthy subject for an administrator. Finally, the NIH is the biggest federal grantor here at MIT, replacing the Defense Department and the Department of Energy long ago. Do you think you will live to see a time when nobody refers to the life sciences anymore? It will just be the sciences?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know whether it will become the sciences. I think, it depends on, where you sit and what resolution you're speaking about, right? I don't think that there'll ever be a time when we don't talk about astrophysicists and geneticists, right? Molecular geneticists. These are just different pursuits. The thing I'm excited about is the conversation that crosses the disciplines. So I described earlier my delight, astonishment, excitement at discovering the cross-disciplinary conversations that are possible at MIT, and the fact that as the life science, as biology has become a quantitative discipline that has a parts list, engineers pick up the bits and pieces from that parts list and put them into, the work of engineers, which is very exciting. It is happening already. The life sciences kind of, is present in much of what we do at MIT. But the parts list in the life sciences is right now different from the parts list in the physical sciences. And, obviously the parts list in the physical sciences underlies what happens in biology. I guess, I don't worry so much about names. Many people ask me, well, aren't you going to need some new departments at MIT? Shouldn't you reorganize your departments? And my response is, well, it's kind of hard to do that, and I'm not sure what the department names need to be for 10 or 20 years from now. What's most important, though, is that we allow our faculty, no matter what their departmental name is, to work with whomever they need to advance their ideas. And so, you know, we sort faculty and departments. One of the very fun things that I discovered at MIT, in order to get to know the people at MIT and what they're working on, Raphael Reif, the provost, and I have breakfast with faculty once a month. You know, they come to my house, and, you know, a group of about a dozen. We sit around the table and everyone talks about what their work on, and I love to have them tell us also what they teach. And when I started with the faculty who had received tenure in the last 5 years. It seemed like a good group to start with. They were relatively early in their careers. And what I discovered was, if I hadn't looked at the invitation list and didn't know what departments they came from, is that we went around the table and each person talked about their research and what they taught. I couldn't have told you what department they were in, except that I knew ahead of time. So it's working, you know, and frankly, creating the opportunity or the possibility that any department will hire a faculty member, regardless of where their degree is or what they're working on, but just important that they are working on a subject that's of critical interest to that department, and hires them in a way that allows them to work with faculty in any other department. I think that's where the future is, and I worry less about what the names of the departments are than to open the windows and doors.
Describe the commitment to cancer research here at MIT, how sustained that commitment is, and how cross-disciplinary it is, how MIT is unique to that task or important to that task.
Yeah. It's a fascinating story. So the Center for Cancer Research was started in 1974 by Salvador Luria. So Nixon launched the war on cancer just a couple years before, and Luria understood that MIT could make a contribution. That was possible because in the 1950s, the biology department totally oriented itself toward molecular genetics. It was a new field, and they had the audacity to say, we're going to do that. And so the biology department really, you know, did only molecular genetics starting in the mid-50s and onward, and that was what allowed MIT to participate in the war on cancer. It's unusual because we don't have a medical school, we don't have a hospital. There are only a few centers for cancer research that are not part of a medical complex. So Luria launched it. They hired 12 faculty into the Center for Cancer Research. Of those 12, Luria already had his Nobel Prize when he started the Center for Cancer Research. But of the 12 faculty, the original appointees in the center, 4 have won Nobel Prizes so far. Luria had exquisite taste in people. And when I arrived, the Center for Cancer Research desperately needed new facilities, And the current director, Tyler Jacks, who hasn't won a Nobel Prize yet, but I have confidence that he will. He should. Extraordinary scientist, but also a great leader. I talked to him about what the plans were for this new building for the Center for Cancer Research, and he described, again, an astonishing world where they had gotten a bunch of engineers and chemists and clinicians involved in this new Center for Cancer Research, which was very different from Luria's Center for Cancer Research. And as Tyler and I talked about it, we said, well, why would we just move the biologists into this new facility? Why wouldn't we create a facility for the 21st century and actually incorporate the larger vision of cancer research? So under construction, to be dedicated in March, is the Koch Institute for Integrative Cancer Research, which is the successor to Luria's Center for Cancer Research. And that building will house a dozen cancer biologists. I would argue some of the very best cancer biologists in the world, and I think there are others who would substantiate that claim, but a dozen engineers also, whose work includes work on cancer. And so it is a fantastic mix of engineers and biologists dedicated to a new approach to solving the diagnosis, the prevention, the treatment of cancer. incredibly exciting. Now, I have to say it is only one example of this engineering, physical science, life science convergence, but it is, we'll have a physical place very soon that represents it. One of our great good fortune is that MIT doesn't have a medical school, we don't have a hospital, but in the Boston region, we have, I think it's the 4 or 5 top funded academic hospitals. And they are willing and interested collaborators with the MIT faculty, and so there's a great mix of clinical expertise and scientific expertise, engineering expertise that really is bringing a new direction to cancer research.
Architecture has always been very important here at MIT. How important is it for the physical space to signify the approach to problems? And you see various eras of architecture here. We're in the classical sort of part of MIT. There's also the kind of hodgepodge, wonderful kind of cacophony of architecture. And then you bring something fundamentally different here.
Yeah, well, at the main group, I love this 1916 building. I often describe it as being the kind of classical Jeffersonian academical village, because if you stand out on Memorial Drive and look at the main group, it's a set of buildings that kind of march up the quad to the Temple of Knowledge, invariably under a dome at the head of this quadrangle. But when MIT was built in 1916, it's different from how the University of Virginia or many of these other academical villages were built in a couple of ways. One is it's huge, and the other is it's only one building. So it was built as a single building, so that chemistry and physics and mechanical engineering and civil engineering are all in the same building. And as I walk around the main group today, I can't tell you when I've left the chemistry department and entered the physics department or the math department or mechanical engineering, material science. It's all mixed together. So in 1916, when we moved into this new facility, it was built with an architecture of collaboration. And that has become my theme, the architecture of collaboration, and we see that manifest in many of the new buildings. And the Koch Institute is about that. Every floor will have both biologists and engineers. Every floor has core laboratories where anyone can come and use them. And I mean anyone, not just in the Koch Institute, anyone around MIT who is working on these state-of-the-art technologies will have access to those technologies in the core technology labs in the Koch Institute. So it is going to be another cauldron of collaboration. It sits at the center of what I've called the Great Circle, which is where the convergence between engineering, the physical sciences, the life sciences is happening, kind of double time. And if you look at the buildings around the Koch Institute, the phenomenal Ray and Maria Stata Center that houses electrical engineering, computer science, and philosophy and linguistics. The Parsons Building, where the more biologically inclined parts of civil and environmental engineering, brain and cognitive science is complex. The Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research, the Broad Institute for Genomic Medicine, the Koch Biology Building, the Department of Chemical Engineering, the Department of Biological Engineering. I mean, these are all right there in this mix. A 20-minute walk from the Massachusetts General Hospital. And in this area, within walking distance of where we sit today, I think there's something like 50 or 60 life science companies. So it's a great and exciting place, and I think architecture is important. Making sure that people can get out of their departments, that they don't feel that they're constrained in their departments or their disciplines. And frankly, one of the other exciting things about our faculty is they're always exploring the new. So the people they're collaborating with today are likely to be different from the people they're going to be collaborating with tomorrow, and I can't foresee who they're going to be, so let's just make sure everyone can get everywhere.
I mean, you describe a kind of, Paris of the medical world, in the sense that there's this function and excitement and mix, but it's also sustainable. It will be here 150 years from now.
It will be here 150 years from now.
You're convinced of that?
Oh, it'll be here 150 years from now. I don't know what it'll look like with the, what kind of work is going to be going on in the buildings. The Broad Institute is a phenomenal, I wouldn't even call it an experiment now, but I described MGH being 20 minutes away, but the Broad is a collaboration between Harvard, MIT, and the Harvard hospitals, and we see more and more of that. Frankly, it's always been happening. Carl Taylor Compton, one of the greatest of my predecessors, himself did a collaboration with MGH. He worked on the radio labeling of iodine for the treatment of hyperactive thyroid, for the treatment of goiter. And he himself talked about biological engineering and managed to change the name of the Department of Biology to biological engineering, but it only lasted a couple years before it reverted back to biology. So he saw this future with some accuracy.
He's also the longest serving president of MIT, 18 years.
Oh, tough years too.
Conceivably, you could serve longer.
I don't anticipate serving as long, never mind longer. He was president during very, very tough times. He started in 1930, the throes of the Depression, and then through the war, World War II. He was a physicist and was charged by the corporation to bring first-rate science to MIT. And so I really credit him for this exciting mix that we have now of astonishing science side by side with astonishing engineering.
How long do you think you'll be here?
I have no guesses on that. As long as I'm able to serve the MIT community and help us discover new opportunities and new ways we can serve.
And I sense from the expression on your face that mixed in with that call to service, there's a fair amount of fun.
Oh, there's tremendous fun. One of my colleagues describes being in these jobs as thrilling. It's thrilling. You know, it's not a walk in the park, ever. And it's enormously exciting. It's enormously demanding also. But why would you be someplace that isn't thrilling?
Susan Hockfield, thank you very much. President of MIT on its 150th birthday. Congratulations.
Thank you.